I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
This tool appeared to have so much promise to bring us together, to drive transparency and accountability.
That's historian and journalist Garrett Graff discussing, believe it or not, the internet.
I don't think a lot of us sign on in the morning full of hope and optimism and promise about what the internet is going to bring us. And yet that really was the feeling of the early 2000s.
We discussed the new season of its podcast, Long Shadow, Breaking the Internet, a show tracing the 3 decades in which the internet moved from civic promise to existential crisis.
The way that our country is, it is because of decisions made by specific people at specific moments in our past.
This is a fascinating conversation coming right up.
Hey friend, if you didn't know, I started a newsletter a while back that comes out every 2 weeks. I've been delighted to hear from so many of you about positive response to the newsletter. We call it the No Small Endeavor Notebook, where I riff on themes and topics related to our podcast, giving you additional material for thinking and doing in your own quest to make sense of what it might mean to live a good life. Join us by going now to nosmallendeavor.com and sign up there. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com to sign up now for our free No Small Endeavor Notebook newsletter.
Do you love No Small Endeavor? Well, for as little as $5 a month, you can become an NSC Plus subscriber and take your listening even deeper. Here's what you'll get: ad-free episodes, exclusive bonus episodes from me, and full access to my in-depth series on the cardinal virtues. Plus, you'll be invited to our quarterly book clubs, a chance to read, reflect, and connect with our community. And starting this month, a brand new series, which I'm calling Bunyan-like Progress, my memoirish tale of a boy from Alabama and what it's meant both to forsake and hold on to my Bible Belt roots. And you won't just be getting perks, you'll be supporting conversations that listeners describe as life-giving, thought-provoking, and even how I'm surviving the current political environment. So, if you've found No Small Endeavor meaningful in your own life, join us. For as little as $5 a month, you'll help us keep bringing thoughtful, respective dialogue to the world and get even more of the content you love. And if you can do more than $5 a month, you'll all the more make possible the beauty, truth, and goodness we are seeking to sow in the world. Subscribe today at the link in the show notes, or go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus. Again, that's nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus. I love the autumn. I just spent a weekend with a friend cutting and splitting firewood for the winter. With the days getting shorter, the summer chores fewer, and the fall colors on their way, everything seems to be slowing down. Just delightful. And then in the midst of all those creature comforts are yet another, our new bowl and branch signature sheets. Yes, those bowl and branch signature sheets are buttery soft, breathable to sleep in, and made with the highest quality 100% organic cotton in durable designs, and come with a 30-night worry-free guarantee. We are indeed having no worries and a great deal of delight with our new bowl and branch sheets. So start building your sanctuary of comfort this fall with Bowl and Branch. For a limited time, get 20% off your first set of sheets plus free shipping at bowlandbranch.com/NSE. That's Bowl and Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/NSE to save 20% and unlock free shipping. Exclusions apply. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
Social media is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad, just like a hammer.
That's an excerpt from the newest season of best-selling historian journalist Garrett Graff's hit podcast, Long Shadow, Breaking the Internet. In the latest season of the show, Garrett traces the history of the internet over the past 3 decades, from its birth, greeted with curiosity, fascination, and hopefulness, to today.
I can't believe how easy it is to surf the net.
It's so easy to learn and so much fun to play on.
Surf's up, see you on the net.
Garrett takes listeners to the heady 2010s, when optimism around social media hit an all-time high, and Facebook had literally made democratic revolution possible.
This will be like domino for other countries. Everywhere in the Arab country is going to follow Egypt.
But then, a shift. Amidst the optimism spurred by our newfound connectivity comes a fundamental shift in the economic forces shaping our online experience and our lived experience beyond.
This very simple business decision of we're going to rely on advertisers leads to we need people to stay on the site as long as they can, leads to what keeps people around is content that makes them even angrier.
Today on the show, we'll explore how that new business model of monetizing attention created a domino effect that even the tech billionaires themselves could not have predicted.
I think we all knew in the back of our minds something bad could happen. But I think the way we defined it was not like this.
Today, our conversation with historian, journalist, and host of the podcast Long Shadow, Garrett Graff. Welcome, Garrett.
Thanks so much for having me.
Very pleased to have you. Looking forward to the conversation today. It says in your bio on your website, throughout his career and work, Graff remains committed to one guiding idea, that understanding history is not a luxury, it's a civic responsibility. And so let me ask to start, why is understanding the history of the internet a civic responsibility, you think?
It's a great question, and I think it has a lot to do with why we chose the internet and the rise and fall of social media as the topic for this season, which is every year on Long Shadow, we try to pick a big public policy issue and try to explain why America is the way that it is. I think what we try to do is look back over the last 40 or 50 years and use history to tell that story of today. And the way that our country is, the way that our culture is, the way that our government is, as Kamala Harris might say, is not because we just fell out of a coconut tree. It is because of decisions made by specific people at specific moments in our past. And we tried to go back and trace that to explain how we ended up the way that we are. And so our goal for this season was to go back and sort of look at how those decisions got made and how we ended up in the sort of toxic cesspool of online hate, harassment, and misogyny that I think most of us now see on a near daily basis online.
Given all of the historical work that you do, why do you think Americans, it seems in particular, are so reticent to take history seriously? Or why is there sort of dismissal, perhaps? Or is there? Is that a fair thing to say about our fellow citizens?
I think a lot of it has to do with America's sense of exceptionalism, our sense that as a country, a people, and a culture, we are distinct and better than the civilizations and the countries that have come before us. You know, the sort of abiding dream of America has always been this two-pronged promise that every generation lives a life better than the generation that came before it, and that we can all Horatio Alger style pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And I think that in believing all of that, in sort of wrapping our nation in that mythology, we have done a disservice to how much our future is driven by our past.
So with the new season of Long Shadow and looking at the internet, often looks like we have this constructive promise that gets made by the technology, and there seems to be some payout in a positive, constructive way socially, and then the next thing we know, a much worse, unanticipated turn occurs. Then it happens again and again and again and again. Is that a fair way to kind of summarize the way the storytelling works?
Yeah, and I think that, one of the hardest things with this season, I started my tech and journalism career in the early 2000s, right at the dawn of social media and Google and YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, and trying to go back now and explain in the podcast just how promising and exciting those early years actually felt to be a part of, from this moment in 2025 where we have such mixed feelings about the role of our daily internet lives and sort of this self-hate that comes from our own addictions to Instagram and Twitter and TikTok or what have you. We recognize that these things are not bringing joy into our lives anymore. We still use them. We still are medically or not addicted to them as tools in our daily lives. But, you know, I don't think a lot of us sign on in the morning full of hope and optimism and promise about what the internet is going to bring us on a daily basis now. And yet that really was the feeling of the early 2000s. So trying to tell that story across the season and remind people, many of whom in their 20s and 30s today have never known that period of promise and excitement online. So it was a real challenge.
So let's look at some of those rhythms there, from hope to loss of hope. Could you maybe sketch out for us the way in which the internet gave us such promising possibilities in the midst of the Arab Spring, for example?
Yeah. And I think that period from the late 2000s through the early 2010s was probably the peak of the promise of the internet. Here in the US, we saw internet enthusiasm drive changes in our national politics and deliver the presidency to Barack Obama. We saw this sort of generational promise of a wired youth around the world who were going to be able to use these tools to upend authoritarianism and upend dictatorships, a promise that really came to fruition in the early period of the Arab Spring, where you saw Twitter and Facebook and these other social media and internet tools really be a key part of the foundation of revolutions in places like Tunisia and most notably in Egypt and elsewhere. These sort of Middle Eastern dictatorships that had seemed completely unmovable until the arrival of internet organizing allowed for a stream of information and offline organizing to take place that completely upended these governments and overturned dictatorships. And so we build up to the third episode of this season looking at that Arab Spring moment, primarily through the eyes of both reporters who covered the Arab Spring in Egypt and the protests in and around Tahrir Square, but also the young organizers who actually were able to use these tools to take on an entire authoritarian regime sort of independently with incredible bravery and personal heroism, often at great personal cost. These protest organizers were arrested and tortured and beaten and imprisoned, sometimes for years. But the nature of online organizing meant that it was diffuse enough and broad enough and easy enough to use that the government couldn't control them in the way that they had been used to controlling state-owned media for the decades up until the arrival of the internet and social media.
Those stories that you tell are just remarkable about the ways in which as you said, the courage and the ingenuity in using the internet is just so remarkable, and what they're able to pull off in a way that obviously couldn't have been done before. And yet then again, the story then unfolds so that very same mechanism then becomes the mechanism of authoritarian repression. So for those who are not so familiar with that part of the story, kind of unpack some of that for us.
Yeah, and it was a switch that you began to see relatively quickly. Mid part of the 2010s, where authoritarian governments began to understand how they could use the internet and use social media basically to control populations in the same way that populations had been originally using them to upend authoritarian dictatorships and demand transparency and accountability. The way that the internet was evolving, which was this idea that it was a tool that was no longer user-driven, but algorithm-driven. That algorithm actually encouraged polarization. It encouraged enragement, and it encouraged the weaponization of existing seams in society, and that it was sort of something that you could use both to spread misinformation and disinformation and conspiracies, but also to attack democracies. This is really the insight that Russia had in 2016 ahead of the US presidential election, where the Russian government began to understand how to turn bots and trolls on Twitter and Facebook into driving division and polarization in the United States. There's a misunderstanding in some ways that Twitter trolls and bots can create new divisions, but they don't really create new divisions. What they're able to do is exacerbate and inflame existing seams in political debate, in existing seams in polarizing topics and content. And that was what Russia was able to do at mass scale, both inside Russia, which I think is sort of part of the interesting story, and the way that they perfected many of these tactics in spreading sort of pro-Putin propaganda internally, domestically inside Russia to bolster his political standing inside the country, and then began to turn those tools to more move against politics in the United States.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and a conversation with Garrett Graff. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in this episode and a full transcript. We also have a free bi-monthly newsletter in which I riff on themes and behind-the-scenes goings-on called the NSE Notebook. You can subscribe to that newsletter for free by going to our website at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. Coming up, Garrett and I discuss the birth of the algorithms in social media and my take on social media, the Lord of the Rings, and Socrates. It has been so delightful to see more and more listeners like you sign up for NSE Plus. Our growing community is made up of intelligent and thoughtful people looking for a holistic approach to human flourishing. Signing up for NSE Plus is also a way to support the show and the work we're doing, and in fact, we depend upon that kind of support. But in addition to supporting the show, you'll get exclusive access to bonus content, and the No Small Endeavor you've come to love will be completely ad-free. In fact, you won't even hear ads like this one. So go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSE Plus to become a member of our community today. Join for as little as $5 a month. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com, click on that red button that says Join NSE Plus to become a member today.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
How conscious were decisions made by social media companies, for example, to allow outrage to become a primary mechanism in what it put forward and what it is going to push toward the top of a newsfeed?
There was this period in the early 2000s where the user was really in control of the content that they saw online. You went to blogs that you liked and read the content. In the early Facebook era, most people don't even remember this. You actually had to go to your friends' individual pages to see what they were up to. And on YouTube, you could watch a video, but you had to really search that video out. And so on a daily basis, you were really curating your own online information diet, and you were in charge of where the content came from that you wanted to consume. And that begins to change by the end of the 2000s as these social media companies, first Facebook and then Twitter and others, began to move away from a user-driven model to an algorithm-driven model. This change begins to drive from a very simple business decision that these tech companies make, which is they are not going to be user revenue driven. They're not going to be subscription based. As a Facebook user, you pay nothing for the service. Facebook turns to this advertiser driven model, which means they need people to stay on the website for as long as they can in order to sell as many ads as they can. And Facebook becomes all about how do we maximize eyeballs on the Facebook newsfeed. And what they figure out is the algorithm, and that the way that they log every interaction that you have with the website and all of the other websites that you follow across the rest of the internet through cookies and back-end data accumulation means that they're trying to figure out in very careful and nuanced ways what are the things that are going to keep this particular person looking at this website longer. And what they come to determine very quickly is that content that makes us angry, content that we don't like seeing, content that enrages us, actually makes us stick around longer. People are more likely to engage with and share and react to and comment on and watch content that enrages them. And over time, what ends up happening is these algorithmically driven news feeds on social media websites become incredibly sophisticatedly curated to enrage us. And at one point, Facebook is weighting in its algorithm the equivalent of the dislike button 5 times as powerfully as they're weighting the like button. If you see something on your Facebook news feed that you don't like and tell Facebook that, then you are 5 times more likely to see more content like that.
Fascinating.
Than you are something that you actually want to, that makes you happy and joyful and, kittens and unicorns and rainbows. But this very simple business decision of we're going to rely on advertisers then leads to, which means we need people to stay on the site as long as they can, which leads to what keeps people around is content that makes them even angrier. And you sort of see in like very few steps, this very quick pivot of the web and social media to this moment where we are now a decade or more into, where the entire social media world is now geared towards enraging us.
Yeah, and this obviously is not merely a matter of individual rage, but has very far-reaching social consequences as you play out in numerous ways. Share with us, for example, the impact that this had upon Myanmar and the story there.
One of the things that you begin to see over the course of the 2010s is this way that this enraging content spreads around the world. And there is no more horrific example of that than in Myanmar, which was for a very brief period of time, more than a decade ago, seen as this sort of rising moment of democracy and promise and hope. And then largely through politically driven hate in Myanmar against the Rohingya minority that begins to spread online, particularly on Facebook, where in a way that's similar to a lot of developing countries in the 2010s, there really is no internet beyond Facebook. I think one of the things we misunderstand in the West is, for us, Facebook is sort of one website among many. And that for much of the world beyond, particularly places with less connectivity, less desktop computer usage, where the internet is sort of more a mobile first phenomenon, Facebook can be basically the entire internet in some countries. And Facebook did not do a good job of policing the content that was spreading in sort of local languages in Myanmar. They did not have the personnel or the practices and policies in place to stop a really viral hate speech from spreading online. And it resulted in and helped contribute to a genocide against the Rohingya people in Myanmar, one of the sort of great human rights catastrophes and atrocities of the decade. A UN investigation very firmly pointed the finger at Facebook afterward, basically saying that Facebook helped pour gasoline on this bonfire in Myanmar. And it was that, along with the Russian attack on the 2016 election here in the United States, I think really spurred Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook executives after 2016 to have this moment of conscience where they were trying to figure out how to do this better, and, you know, worried about their own complicity in enabling some of these worst offenses of the decade against democracy and against human rights. And then pretty quickly we watched Facebook step back from a lot of those promises and step back from a lot of those attempts to crack down on misinformation and disinformation and the way that bad faith actors, including particularly authoritarian nation states, were using and weaponizing the tools of Facebook and other social media sites to further their own dictatorial agendas.
So I'd like to shift the conversation just a bit and ask about a particular metaphor that gets used often. And you've used it yourself. I've been kind of keeping a tally. I think 5 times in our conversation, you've used the word tool to refer to the internet. And so I'd like to explore that just a little bit, and I'd like to start exploring that by this clip from the journalist David Woolman, who had traveled to Egypt to report about a story in the summer of 2008, some of the activists that would contribute to the Arab Spring. Let's listen to this.
Social media is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad, just like a hammer. I got to know people who put it to use in such a spectacular and inspiring way. And now to think about them and how their world hasn't really improved, to say nothing of how divided the United States is, that's sort of gutting. Now it is really such a trope, this idea that social media is a tool. And AR-15 is a tool also. Could be used for good, could be used for bad. But let's be a little more honest about how often it's being used for one or the other.
So here, Woolman's using what some philosophers who have written about technology call an instrumental view of technology, that the primary way in which we make ethical judgments about technology should be based upon the end toward which the technology is employed. And thus, in that regard, tool is a perfect metaphor, right? But there are others who have pushed back on this and said, this might be an altogether insufficient metaphor to think about what we're dealing with here. So I particularly like Jacques Ellul, 20th century French sociologist who writes a lot about technology in fascinating ways in the middle of the 20th century. And he kind of pushes back against this and says, no, the much more helpful way to be thinking about technology is what he calls characterology, which is this weird term of saying, what kind of people are we becoming by employing these mechanisms or employing technique? And so I guess my first question here is, do you find the metaphor of tool sufficient for getting at what you want to get at?
I'm actually very sympathetic to the example that you give there, because I think one of the challenges of wrestling with what the algorithm of social media has done to our society is coming back to what I was talking about, which is it doesn't create new seams. It exacerbates existing ones. And one of the, I think, unfortunate takeaways that we are left with at this moment is the question, is the internet just telling us who we really are? That if the algorithm is accurate, maybe the internet is right about who we are. And one of the challenges of this moment as we watch the collapse of faith in institutions, the collapse of sort of trustworthy news ecosystems is the internet showing us that we are sort of all more Hobbesian than we would like to pretend that we are on a daily basis.
What do you think the answer to that question is? Do you think that's true or not?
Well, I think that's certainly true in some ways in our politics. I think we are living in an unprecedented moment politically right now in the United States. But I don't think it's quite as unprecedented as we would like to pretend it is. Much of the American history of media and politics involves moments of extreme vitriol and partisan polarization and a partisan and polarizing media environment. You look at the second half of the 20th century and the Walter Cronkite era of TV news, and that across all of the rest of American history is much more the aberration than the norm in terms of the way that Americans consume objective news information. Obviously, the Walter Cronkite era had all sorts of its own blind spots and challenges of objectivity, but it did actually represent at least this narrow time period where there was a few major sets of relatively well-vetted sources of information that were coming into our body politic.
For my own take on some of that, I think, for example, about the ring in Lord of the Rings with Gollum. Mm-hmm. Which goes back to Plato's Socrates, the story that they tell about the shepherd boy who discovers the ring that makes him invisible, and then it immediately corrupts him, and he steals, kills, and destroys because he has this power. And I guess I tend to think that there's something about, say, anonymity that we're offered by the internet. There's something about secretiveness and privatization that has no accountability that seems to me inevitably will foster, in many, many cases, the worst possible version of ourselves, right? So I don't necessarily think of it as showing who we really are, as facilitating us becoming the worst version of ourselves.
Yes.
Is that fair, you think?
I think that's a great way of looking at it. I'm reading right now Sam Tannehouse's new biography of William F. Buckley, which is just a tremendous book. It's one of the best biographies I've ever read in my life. And Buckley is lamenting at one point, forget whether it was in the 50s or 60s, how poor America's news consumption was and information consumption, and was, as an outrageous fact, pointing out that the average American adult only spends 30 minutes a day reading a newspaper. And I was sort of thinking about, man, like, can you imagine it today? The average American adult spent 30 minutes reading a high quality print version of a local or national newspaper. Like, what an incredibly different and better informed country we would have.
Coming up, a short break, followed by our discussion on government regulation of our wired world, the social media habits of tech executives, and 2 books that might help you understand tech and politics in America.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Let's begin with a clip from Garrett's show I found particularly haunting.
It's November 10th, 2017. Chamath Palihapitiya, a tech billionaire and former Facebook executive, is giving a Q&A at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. It's one of those extremely frank talks that seems destined to go viral.
Consumer internet businesses are about exploiting psychology. We want to psychologically figure out how to manipulate you as fast as possible and then give you back that dopamine hit. We did that brilliantly at Facebook. Instagram has done it. WhatsApp has done it. You don't realize it, but you are being programmed.
You said that this is a time for soul searching in social media businesses, and you were part of building the largest one. What soul searching are you doing right now on that?
I feel tremendous guilt. I think we all knew in the back of our minds something bad could happen. But I think the way we defined it was not like this. It literally is a point now where I think we have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. It is eroding the core foundations of how people behave by and between each other. No civil discourse, no cooperation, misinformation, mistruth. We are in a really bad state of affairs right now, in my opinion. If you feed the beast, that beast will destroy you.
When you came across this, was this sort of forthright acknowledgement that this is what the big tech companies have done surprising to you, or did you know enough at this point that this really didn't surprise you?
This was a startling piece of tape to uncover and play. There's a reason it leads off one of our episodes. But at the same time, I think one of the things that is startling for me across so much of the way that we have seen the leaders of the tech community react to what they have wrought is how many of them have actually sort of turned against their own tools. The number of Silicon Valley tech executives who will brag like, oh, my kids aren't allowed screen time. I won't get them a phone or let them have social media accounts, until they're in their mid 40s kinds of things. And it's just so striking to me. You wouldn't ever see that in any other industry. Imagine Mary Barra talking about, well, I wouldn't ever let my kids drive, or imagine, the scandal of an Airbus or a Boeing executive being like, my entire family, we take the train to all of our summer vacations because, I just don't believe anyone can responsibly be using an airplane. And that there's sort of something about the weirdness of how tech executives have come to understand the damage that their tools can do when used appropriately, when used as intended, that I think makes them much closer to being the sort of cigarette executives of our modern era. Part of what we talk about in our final episode is one of the things I really worry about right now is the extent to which we seem to be, as a society, speed running all of these same mistakes as we move society towards incorporating and adopting artificial intelligence. And that we sit there and listen as these AI executives like brag. Dario Modi was saying just a couple of days ago, like, there's a 25% chance that this all goes off the rails and destroys the world. And you're like, we wouldn't let any other industry proceed with an invention where its own boosters were forecasting doom so openly, so loudly, and so consistently without a lot more government guardrails, regulations, safeguards, industry protections. And I just really sort of wonder whether this is a moment where in 15 or 20 years, if there's anyone left to make a podcast, whether there'll be sort of a follow-up podcast season like ours that's like, and executives knew that they were about to destroy the world with AI and just forged right ahead.
What's your narrative on the reticence to take seriously oversight?
So this is something that I've actually spent a lot of time on across probably 20 or 25 years of my career at this point, which is government has just utterly failed in appropriately understanding or regulating this era of technology. And there are a couple of different reasons for that. One is the speed with which these technologies have transformed the world, is just a speed that is faster than government and legislative bodies are really able to work. It takes 5 years on average for a piece of legislation in Congress to go from introduction to passage and enactment. And, 5 years in technology is an enormous period of time. If you sort of calculate that out, basically, like, we're still working our way right now through legislation that was mostly written before COVID, which is sort of a stunning way to think about how far behind in legislating our daily lives we are. The second thing, and I don't think we can underestimate this, is the gerontocracy that we have seen overwhelm American politics, particularly in the last decade, but really across the last 15 or 20 years more broadly, where most of the people who are making laws about our technology in Congress have never used any of this technology natively. And, it's really hard to understand how all of these technologies actually impact your daily life if you are one of the members of Congress who still has your staff print out emails for you, and then, you handwrite note responses to them. We talk about in the podcast that sort of incredible moment where Mark Zuckerberg is appearing on Capitol Hill after the Rohingya genocide, after the 2016 election, and you have members of Congress asking him, how do you make money? And he's like, we sell advertising, which is like literal news to the members of Congress on the committee that is supposed to be regulating Facebook.
So in the middle of all this, in your heart of hearts, do you think that these sorts of business models are fundamentally compatible or incompatible with democratic civic life?
Oh, it's a really good question. Contrary to everything that you have heard me talk about in the rest of this interview, I'm a very hopeful person. I'm sort of fundamentally optimistic about the direction of the world. And I am my own tech enthusiast. I was an early blogger in the 2000s. I was actually the first blogger accredited to cover a White House press briefing 20 years ago, literally, and have always been an early adopter of these tools and technologies. And yet, much like a lot of the other tech executives that we were just talking about, like, I now am the parent of 2 young kids and am doing everything that I can possibly do to shelter them from anything having to do with the internet or social media or cell phones, and have really complicated and mixed feelings about my own relationship to these technologies. I'm a journalist, and so I spend an enormous portion of my day reading social media, and it's how I stay informed, and it's how I know how to write about the things that I want to write about, and it's where I find sources. And I feel at the end of the evening just as dirty as everyone when I sort of am sitting there scrolling mindlessly through Instagram for much longer than I want to be. And I don't really know how to undo this. I know that there are people who are hard at work on it. There are people who really believe they can build a better civic square for us. And I don't know that I am optimistic about that.
If you had a magic wand, you could make one change regarding the internet or technology. What would that one thing be?
Oh, that's an amazing question. I think that part of the challenge is there is not a single change to all of this. And that a lot of what we are living through online also is downstream from and follows problems that existed in our body politic and our national civic fabric well before the internet arrived.
1-2 books maybe you would suggest that everybody ought to read on technology and where we find ourselves in this current moment?
There's a book that actually is featured very prominently in 2 of our seasons now by Joan Donovan, and a couple of other co-authors, Emily Dreyfus and Brian Friedberg, that's called Meme Wars, the untold story of the online battles upending our democracy. And it's a really thoughtful book-length look at the last 10 years of American politics. And then there's another book by two New York Times reporters, Shira Frankel and Cecilia Kang, that's about Facebook, called An Ugly Truth: Inside Facebook's Battle for Domination, that came out a number of years ago, that I found and I thought was one of the best books that I had read that year, and really helped me sort of understand and contextualize this thing that we had all been living through together, and how and why Facebook ended up doing the things that it did.
Been talking to Garrett Graff, host of the Edward R. Murrow award-winning podcast Long Shadow, especially on season 4, Breaking the Internet. Garrett, thanks so much for the conversation. Remarkable, and thank you for all the good work you're doing in the world to help us see things that we're not seeing otherwise.
Thanks so much for a great conversation.
Here's one small closing take on today's episode. We are clearly at a time in which civic virtues, that is, the habits, practices, dispositions that make a civil society possible, are in short supply. So I would have loved to discuss more Garrett's contention that understanding history is not a luxury, it's a civic responsibility. And not understanding the history of the internet, not understanding how it works, is clearly a civic vice. We saw this in Garrett's stark reminder about Myanmar, that social media there resulted in and helped contribute, he said, to a genocide against the Rohingya people. A genocide, I'll note, fueled not by secret weapons, but by patently false social media posts and algorithmic hate. Perhaps the most haunting question from Garrett was this. He said, is the internet just telling us who we really are? And as I said in our conversation, I don't want to believe that the internet is telling us who we are. Instead, I want to believe that social media algorithms instead are facilitating the worst versions of ourselves. Perhaps I'm naive here, but I do not want to relinquish the bit of individual or familial or communal autonomy we do still have. We can be aware of the profound ways the algorithms, as one former Facebook executive put it, the way the algorithms are programming us. But we can still seek ways to live and speak with transparency, honesty, accountability. We can spend less time online, more time conversing with our neighbors, or reading history books, or cultivating civic virtue. We can refuse to lie down in the bed the tech moguls have made for us. We can refuse to allow them to turn us into the worst version of ourselves. That's a small, but not so small take on today's episode. Peace to you, my friend. You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with historian and journalist Garrett Graff. We've been discussing season 4 of his podcast Long Shadow. That season is entitled Breaking the Internet. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.
Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contracts. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.